The 19 South Africans who survived the deadly conflict in Gaza are safely back home. The South African citizens were evacuated from the war-torn enclave to Egypt before coming home earlier this week. Israel resumed its military operations in Gaza after the 7-day ceasefire, blaming Hamas for refusing to release more Israel hostages. To date, more than 16,000 Palestinians have been killed, with thousands more injured. Let's bring in now in studio Professor Haidar Eid, who is an associate professor of literature at Gaza's al-Aqsa University, and he's one of the rescued South Africans who arrived early this week. Prof, thank you so much for joining us in studio. First of all, how does it feel being back home?
I'm still conflicted. I must admit that. I have two homes, in fact. I have one in Gaza, in Palestine, and one in South Africa. At the beginning, I didn't want to leave Palestine because I wanted to stay with my Palestinian family in Gaza. But as things got worse and I lost my flat in Gaza, in fact, I was displaced together with my family, my wife and two daughters, 3 times. The first time it was 1 week after the eruption of the ongoing genocide right now in Gaza. I had to move to the north, and then 5 days after that, when they started attacking the north, I had to move to the south. And now they are attacking the south. So in a way, it's a matter of life or death. And this is why I accepted the invitation by the South African embassies, both in Cairo and in Ramallah, to evacuate and leave Palestine and come back to South Africa. South Africa is my second homeland.
Yeah, just help our viewers understand how life is like in Gaza, especially since October 7th, when we started seeing the retaliation and the bombing of Gaza. How was life there for you guys?
Right. In order to understand what's happening right now in Gaza, you need to contextualize the whole thing. I mean, Gaza, we used to say, especially after the imposition of the deadly siege by apartheid Israel in 2007 on Gaza, we used to say, and these are not my words, these are the words of the mainstream human rights organizations, activists, anti-apartheid activists who visited us in Gaza, from Comrade Ronnie Castles even to the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I mean, they said that Gaza is the largest open-air prison. And right now, in order to directly answer your question, Gaza has been transformed from the largest open-air prison to the largest graveyard. Wherever you go, you have, people dying everywhere. Israel has so far killed more than 17,000 people. There is no safe place whatsoever in Gaza. Gaza is, 360 square kilometers. They asked us to evacuate, the northern part of Gaza, meaning that 1.5 million people, were displaced, in fact. And now, for example, myself, I had to stay with my sister in the south. More than 1.1 million people are staying in UNRWA schools, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, with no food. I remember spending nights hungry, listening to my daughters asking for food and water, no drinking water, no electricity.
Was that after the water and electricity were cut off by Israel?
Right from the beginning, from the beginning. So in other words, they have been trying to make life, apartheid Israel, has been trying to make life impossible for the Palestinians of Gaza. In a way, it is, I myself in one of the articles called it's a combination of genocide, literally genocide, and ethnic cleansing. They wanted to move 2.3 million people, civilians, living in Gaza to the Sinai Desert by making life impossible.
What are people saying on the ground in Gaza whenever Israel comes and says move towards the south? Or because what I picked up from what's being reported on the ground is that even places that used to be regarded as shelter for people whose homes have been destroyed are no longer safe. So the hospitals, the schools. Yeah. So are there people who decide to stay because they choose to, I would rather die in my homeland, or are people saying, you want us to move, but where are we moving to?
Yeah, actually both. There are people who would tell you, where can we move? I mean, there is no safe place whatsoever in Gaza. But I tell you my own personal experience. The day I left my flat, I got a phone call from an Israeli intelligence officer asking me to leave the area. And then I said, where should I go? And then he said, you head north. At that time, when he asked me to go to the north, they were shelling the north. So I was asked to go to the north with my family, with my 2 little daughters. At the same time, they were shelling that area. Of course, I didn't go to the north at that time. I had to stay with my neighbors. And then they flattened the whole neighborhood. And this is why I moved to the north and stayed with my brother for 3 days. And then they called us again. And they asked us to go to the south. And we had this discussion. Should we move or shouldn't we move? Now, if we don't move, we will expose our daughters and our children to death. So emotionally speaking, we had to move because we had no other way. Those who stayed paid an extremely heavy price. Our neighbors in the north, an extremely heavy price. Most of the families who stayed were wiped out. Entire families were wiped out. Still, they are wiping out families in the south now.
Sometimes we forget that there's also a price that individuals play when a war like this unfolds. When you arrived here, you alerted me that you've got a hearing loss, and you asked me to speak a bit louder.
That's correct.
Just explain to the viewers, what is the cause of that hearing loss?
Actually, the first time I was displaced, I was asked to move from the Rimal neighborhood where I live. And I couldn't move to the north, so I stayed with the opposite neighbors who didn't move as well. But because I live in a residential tower, we thought they were going to destroy the residential tower because they are in the habit of destroying residential towers. And that night, that was the beginning of a new military strategy in Gaza. They called it belts of fire, where they start airstrikes, air raids all night long. So all night long we were exposed to airstrikes with the loudest explosions that you can imagine. So I had to close the ears of my daughters. And so I was exposed to that noise. The following day, myself and my wife, we couldn't hear anything. My wife is okay now, but I lost, my hearing is completely gone on the right ear, and the left one is damaged, but I still can hear. Yeah. So it's a very high price that we're paying there.
Israel has consistently said the reason that they even are getting to the schools, are getting to the hospital, is because Hamas is hiding among civilians. From someone who was on the ground in Gaza, is that something you witnessed, where Hamas fighters were hiding and using civilians as human shields?
First of all, I'm not in the habit of responding to Israeli chasparah, Hebrew word for propaganda and lies. It's the same thing like when you black people of South Africa had to respond to apartheid lies and propaganda. But I'll tell you, out of my personal experience, I spent 2 months in Gaza now, since the eruption. I've been there, of course, for more than 15 years. But the last 2 months, I haven't seen a single resistance fighter. Not a single resistant fighter. It's very well known that all fighters are not hiding amongst ordinary people. They are hiding underground. They have their own tunnels, and they have one. I don't know where they are hiding, in fact. But as far as I know, I hear from people, and this is why it's a lie, which is part of Israel's chasparah, in order to justify the killing of civilians in Gaza. More than 90% of those who were killed in Gaza are civilians, including my own relatives. 3 families of my own relatives have been wiped out. Families wiped out completely. I've lost more than 10 of my students, 10 of my, smartest students. I've lost more than 15 of my closest friends, none of whom are fighters or, resistance fighters or activists. Yeah.
What does a situation like this do to the psyche of young people in Gaza? Because the conversation now that is being had, even among different countries, is what is the post-war plan for Gaza? But also a concern is among young people that are growing up and they're witnessing what's going on. So they're seeing their parents dying. They're seeing their homes being destroyed. They're seeing, in the West Bank as well, we started seeing increasing violence there. Is there a risk here where young people are going to be, quote-unquote, radicalized, and they're going to want to fight back. So, in other words, Israel may want to claim we want to destroy Hamas, but what you're actually doing is you're creating anger amongst people that are seeing the devastation that you are causing in their land.
That's a very good question indeed. And, you know, in your introduction, I heard you saying the Israel-Hamas conflict or the Gaza conflict. In fact, we have a problem with that because it's not a conflict. It's a genocidal war launched by a settler colony, an apartheid regime against the colonized indigenous population of Palestine. Now, to get back to your question, in 2006 we were asked to head to the polling station and vote for our representatives, both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And people decided to vote against the Oslo Accords, against the racist two-state solution, and this is why they voted for Hamas. Not because they support Hamas, it is because they are against the facade of the two-state solution and the Oslo Accords. And then apartheid Israel, together with the colonial West, decided to impose a deadly medieval siege on the Gaza Strip. Now, that is the context of what is happening right now in Gaza. And, of course, people wanted to break out of this concentration camp, the largest open-air prison on earth. But in spite of the fact that major human rights organizations said that this is a form of collective punishment that has to come to an end, Israel launched a massacre in 2009, another massacre in 2012, another massacre in 2014, 2021, and now again. Now, because the international community stood idle and did absolutely nothing to stop Israel from committing these war crimes, Israel is doing the same thing again now. And this is one of the reasons why a group of youngsters decided to break out of the wall of the Gaza prison, and hence the context of what happened on the 7th of October. We want our freedom. We want our freedom, definitely. We don't want to spend 2/3 of the population of Gaza have not left Gaza since they were born, by the way. I mean, you can imagine the kind of mentality these people are having. They want their freedom. And with the world not... In fact, the world is complicit. The colonial West has been involved in the genocide that is taking place right now against the people of Gaza. And this is why the younger generation of Gaza, all what they are saying is that we want our freedom. We want freedom, we want equality, exactly like what you have here in South Africa, and we want justice.
What is the post-war plan for Gaza? Because Israel says we want to destroy Hamas completely. Yes. We want to eliminate the security risk. But obviously, at some point, the war has got to end. And I wonder if Israel and countries like the U.S. are going to have influence over which political party or president takes over Gaza, or if the people on the ground are going to still raise their views and perhaps support organizations, perhaps like Hamas or similar to Hamas, that are still pushing for what they believed in and made them support them in the past. What do you think is the plan post the war?
Look, we have immediate demands right now. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need humanitarian aid, and we need international protection. And then we can talk about the future. And the only people who are supposed to be talking about the future are the Palestinians, the people of Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel, 7 million refugees living in the diaspora as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And by the way, 2/3 of the Palestinians of Gaza are refugees entitled to their right of return. In every single case of colonialism, whether Algeria or South Africa or India or Egypt, people supported resistance. Of course you support resistance. All forms of resistance in accordance with international law. Now, what do people want after the end of the genocide? Well, they want justice. They want the implementation of international law. They want their freedom of movement. They want the implementation of United Nations Resolution 194, which clearly calls for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to the lands from which they were ethnically cleansed back in 1948. I am a son of 2 refugee parents who passed away in 2005, dreaming of the day of their return to the Zarnuga village from which they were ethnically cleansed in 1948. You cannot talk about solutions without talking about justice at the same time.
Professor Haidar Eid, I appreciate you making time for us this afternoon.
Thank you so much.